A helpful pregame scouting report. This program contains AI and voice actor portrayals of factual quotes derived from actual players, coaches, people, and Coach Donoher.
This program pays tribute to a man's philosophies, his coaching, and his life spirit, with assists from technology, the history of basketball, and UD's storied past. So welcome to this YouTube podcast, A Relay with Naismith, the days of Coach Don Donoher and the Dayton Flyers. During his days, Donoher was often a featured speaker at banquets and team reunions. Donoher's speech frequently included a metaphor about the game's development as a relay of basketball history, comparing it to a mile relay team that had various legs to carry the baton. He didn't specify 4 legs in this relay. It was figurative in his speech. He was localizing it to the University of Dayton. How he sincerely felt the baton of basketball's relay was handed off directly from his creator, James Naismith, to St. Mary's Institute because it was so soon, within the first decade of invention. Donoher says the original St. Mary's team, a success in that it was established with sparse accommodations in
1901. No gym, no equipment.
Then he would add, St. Mary changed its name to the University of Dayton in 1920, featuring a basketball program which was already one of the oldest in creation. The game was 29 years old. UD's was 19, like a little brother. Donoher was declaring a handoff from Naismith to UD and his mentor coach Tom Blackburn, who launched Flyer basketball to national prominence in the middle of the 20th century. He never included himself as a relay participant, so this program adds a baton handoff to Donoher himself because he's too modest to have done that. Now, a momentary pivot at this juncture, which we might call the early first quarter, for a brief history on the opening leg of the relay. The anguish of basketball's birth. Its growing pains in the relay, where I believe Coach Donoher would take the game's baton and span much of the 20th century and well into the first quarter of this 21st century. He is coaching the game in his mid to late 80s and remains a fixture on the UD scene to this day, well after he's no longer the head coach there. He's born 1932, Toledo, Ohio, the 5th of 5 children, and the game of basketball is in its formative years. It's really just being sculpted. The game was born in 1891 at the YMCA training school in Springfield, Massachusetts. Envision more of a modern-day junior college, not the modern-day Y. By 1932, basketball is restlessly and relentlessly searching for its place as a staple of American society, as the winter sport of choice with a March Madness, a national professional league. Baseball was entrenched as the American pastime. Football had its pro league. Naismith had played football, played center on his college teams. Soccer, gymnastics, lacrosse, track and field, horse racing, boxing, all established. Basketball is in catching up mode. It's gained traction as Donoher begins his life, and especially compared to 1891, when it seemed America was not demanding another sport for high school, college, or pro. First-year instructor James Naismith had a full schedule, teaching at the Springfield, Massachusetts YMCA training school. He taught 6 classes in 1891, swimming, canoeing, boxing, wrestling, psychology, and Bible study. Theology was his first passion. His early interest growing up in Canada was to become a pastor and lead a flock of parishioners. However, at McGill College in Canada, he was encouraged by classmates to become more involved in athletics. He did so, became the starting center on the football team. In grasping an athletics interest, he realized saving souls didn't require a pulpit at a single church. It could occur through espousing clean mind and body, eat right, and most of all, exercise. He felt he could reach more of the masses by working in athletics than by ministering to a congregation or a single flock at a single church. He taught muscular Christianity, or Christian physical fitness, to forge a sound mind with a sound body. Like Naismith, Donoher was a Christian and spiritual man from a deeply religious family. All 5 Donoher children attended Catholic schools. As an adult, Donoher remained a devout Catholic, often attending Mass several times a week, always for a Sunday service. Donoher taught at Dayton, you might say as a living historian of all matters Catholic Marianist UD. Naismith taught physical education at the Y Training School so he could build a history of men and women of clean mind, body, and spirit, ethical moral character through regular exercise and being active. So it was that Naismith reported to his regularly scheduled faculty meeting on a morning in early December 1891. The subject before his staff of colleagues from their boss, Superintendent Dr. Luther Gulick, was, how do we teach a phys ed class with 18 notorious young men? The winters are long and harsh in Springfield, Massachusetts, keeping restless, hyper college athletes, these were ages 18 to 22, pinned inside with few, if any, competitive adult indoor games to play in the 19th century. Naismith listened as the 2 teachers, who had both quit the class, spoke at the meeting of how it was an unruly group, not listening to instruction, an aggressive environment of high-strung, rowdy young men, always ready to tangle. Today's term probably would be a high testosterone group. One of the teachers said he had tried picnic games like adolescent potato sack races. The second teacher tried introductory gymnastics and military marching. Nothing works. It's a group of incorrigibles, said the teacher, labeling the class forever. But Naismith, he stood up and said,
we are failing these students. It's not the students' fault, it's us. We're not appealing to their more mature sports interests.
Imagine the probable anger, annoyance of the 2 teachers in the room listening to this. Perhaps thinking, my own colleague has the audacity to think I'm a failure, and he says it in front of the boss? The awkward silence in the room was broken when Superintendent Gulick made a decision.
Mr. Naismith, you will take over this class.
Naismith protested.
I have no time for this.
He recited his packed schedule. He saw this addition as an annoyance, an imposition. He was deeply irritable. It was a combustible situation to take on an aggravated, aggressive class nicknamed the Incorrigibles. Superintendent Gulick was not angry, but he was adamant. He told Naismith to adjust his attitude, accept the job, and create an indoor activity that would resolve the tension with these students.
You've talked about inventing a new game. This is a good time for you to teach these young men to channel their aggression.
Then he gave Naismith 2 weeks. That was the next staff meeting. He would succeed, or he'd be the latest knockout by the Incorrigibles. Naismith in week 1 and 2 tries bringing outdoor sports inside. Soccer fails. The men all jam in front of the goal. They start elbowing each other and fights start. Lacrosse fails. There's sticks involved. They start bashing each other across the shoulders, the wrists, and the fingers. Football, no way, as it's an all-contact sport, and Naismith is trying to avoid contact, yet create adult competition. The day before his final class, he gives them free rein. He says, open gym for 60 minutes, wants to study what they do. He's resigned to failure, dejected, walking up the stairs to his office in the gym with the staff meeting the next day.
How I hated the thought of going back to my colleagues admitting I too had failed.
Can you imagine the peer pressure he's under? Those 2 teachers are going to be in the meeting, likely wanted him also to have capitulated. But at the 11th hour, Naismith says,
I can still recall how I snapped my fingers and shouted, I've got it.
His eureka moment? No running with the ball. If a player can't run, there's no physical attack. There's no violent tackling. And it eliminates mindless retaliation, too. But if a player can't run, what can the player do? Pass it. This was one small element, but it seemed to unlock the framework of a game that had been marinating in his mind. He wrote 13 rules, most of which still guide today's game. When the Incorrigibles walked in the next day, December 21st, 1891, they showed a curiosity, even an intense interest. Naismith had nailed 2 peach baskets at opposite ends of the 60-foot floor. It's 35 feet wide, no lines on the floor. with obstacles of gymnastics apparatus and weights stored around the edges of the bare court. And to score was elevated. The nailed peach baskets are 10 feet high, unique because in every other game, scoring was fixed on the floor, and the men would jam right in front of any goal with multiple bodies to keep anything from scoring. And that jamming led to pushing, led to elbowing, and ultimately fights. Now the goal, the basket, was high in the air, and rule number 5, no shouldering, holding, pushing, tripping, or striking in any way. The incorrigibles needed to find a way to play this game outside their comfort zone with minimal contact. There's 18 men. They go 9-on-9. The final score, 1-0. William Chase scored from 25 feet, three-pointer today. At the end of the hour, the men don't rush out of the gym. They ask if they can stay and play longer. Naismith is elated, but not so much that he has invented a game for the ages. It's more relief that at his faculty meeting coming up in a couple of hours, he will report he has not been run out of the gym.
I could go to Superintendent Gulick and tell him I could put up. I didn't have to shut up.
Critical to remember, this game we all chase, that Coach Donoher has chased over 2 different centuries, the 20th and 21st. It originated in a brew of frustration. The incorrigibles, who did not want to be in the class, and an agitated Naismith who did not want to teach the class. In fact, he's the third choice. Frustration was a primary factor in the game's creation, and we all know frustration comes with the game. Those who handle frustration, dysfunction, streamline it into positive culture, channel aggression into positive results, they are successful. Basketball was formed in an emotional cauldron, and it's an emotional roller coaster of a game today. Even the name of the first team to play, the Incorrigibles, is emotionally strained, but it set the tone for the dynamics of basketball. So it's not a, aha, snap of the fingers, I have a game for the ages moment. Lost in the shorthand of the story is how Naismith toiled over what to do, and especially how he emotionally, I think spiritually too, connected with his team. He connected with the incorrigibles, made them buy in that this is a good game. Coaches have to connect with their teams, must create buy-in, a functional, enthusiastic culture. That's what Naismith did. He connected with his class, creating a culture that was no longer incorrigible. Rather, his class was his team that was now galvanized. Donoher would connect with his teams as well, with a combination of knowledge, spirituality, love, tough love. Taking the basketball baton, embracing Naismith's game first as a player, then as a coach.
He discovers basketball.
The youngest of 5 children, the first time Donoher ever touched a basketball, he was a 6-year-old first grader.
In 1938, my dad took us to a lake in Sheboygan, Michigan for a vacation, Mullet Lake. There was a court there in the dirt. Some kids were playing, so I did too. Far back as I can remember, there was basketball.
Sheboygan, Michigan is about 300 miles north of Toledo, but he would go no further than his backyard for the majority of his developmental grade school early hoop.
Our parish was St. Agnes. Our backyard on Burley Drive was adjacent to the school property. We had a fence with a gate, and just walk through it, we were at the St. Agnes basketball court. My dad actually put the hoops up on each end of the court. Wooden posts, wood backboards, always had cotton nets up on the rims. It was like having a court in my backyard. That court was active all day until dark. Most players were from the neighborhood, but I was always playing with older guys. As a 4th grader, I was asked to play on the St. Agnes 8th grade team.
In a rare moment of candor hedged with understatement, Donoher added,
I was pretty good. I knew how to play.
The prime jewel of the middle school circuit was the Toledo Catholic Parish 8th grade tournament. There were 26 parishes eligible for the tournament. A team had to win 5 games to win the tournament. The title game was played on the hallowed varsity court of Toledo Central Catholic High School.
We beat St. Thomas 24-23. They write it up in the next morning newspaper. The Toledo Blade or Toledo Times said, "The sparkling play of little Don Donoher led St. Agnes to the title." Actually, Tom McHugh scored our last 8 points, but I got the write-up.
Donoher would have hundreds, maybe thousands of articles written about his basketball life over the next 2 centuries. But the article on his middle school winning team, which I could not find in the archives, was his easiest recall at age 91. It seemed his most enjoyable memory. Even before middle school, Donoher had his nickname. The local gas station, a block from the Donoher home, was owned by Chuck Brown. Brown was a boxing fan. He had seen a Golden Gloves boxer by the name of Mickey Donoher fight, and he hung that lifelong moniker on the sparkling little basketball player. Donoher enrolled where every St. Agnes or Catholic kid went, Toledo Central Catholic High School. He said when he was a freshman, he played on the freshman team. He also said that Specs McCluskey was the only one of his teammates who was playing up on what was called the lightweights, which is what the JV teams were called in 1940 Central. His high school career was excellent. State runner-up as a junior in 1949, losing to Hamilton High School in the final.
I was sick that day with tonsillitis and didn't get to play. Very disappointing to this day.
His senior year, he was a starter. He was captain, but it was plagued with injuries, which made it a more modest season. He did receive a basketball scholarship, but not as a hot recruit, what they would call a 5-star today. As he entered UD at the halfway mark of the 20th century, Donoher told me,
"I recruited myself to Dayton. There were many Central football players going to UD, too. Gene Hickey was a teammate a year ahead of me. He was playing basketball at UD. He came back for a high school game and told me how great UD was, and Dayton basketball was just coming on then. Had a team from my memory that won 14 or 15 consecutive games with Don Meineke, Chuck Grisby, and Leland Norris.
In fact, that team was 27-4 in 1950, averaged 70 points per game, and gave up just 56. Journalist Gary Noon wrote a brilliant long-form story in the Dayton Daily News about that team. He wrote, UD basketball was just beginning to grab the town by the lapels. You can Google that story. It's called The Big D in the Dayton Daily News. It's a Donoher bio piece from 1984. Donoher continued.
Coach Blackburn was there, and his reputation was already established.
A style future Flyer star Henry Finkel would brand rough and gruff as could be. That wasn't necessarily a criticism. That was the predominant coaching style of the era. In the wake of World War II, as many coaches had served their country. Tough, military-type discipline was the norm for teams of the mid-20th century. Donoher believed Blackburn, named Dayton's first full-time coach in 1947, was a primary catalyst in his figurative relay.
They really struck gold when they brought in Tom Blackburn. We are all, everybody here, is a basketball son of Tom Blackburn. There's the gentleman that got this thing started, and he can never be recognized enough for what he did to get this thing called Dayton basketball off and running.
Donoher's freshman and sophomore years, he was playing on the JV, but dressed out for the postseason as the varsity made the trip to the NIT tournament and championship. He explained how much more prestigious the NIT was at that time than even the NCAA tournament was. He said his first time on an airplane, flying to Madison Square Garden. He said his first time at a hotel was at Times Square for the week. He said when his team went to the NCAA tournament, it was via a cramped bus ride to Chicago. The NIT, he said, was a better experience in his playing days. His summer job to supplement his UD scholarship during his college years was working for his dad's family business, Donoher's lighting studio in Toledo.
I would repin chandlers and refurbish old fixtures, separate the brass, and sell it to a junk shop. My dad was all sales. Great in sales, but couldn't use his hands. When I say he built the St. Agnes basketball court, I mean he had his handyman on staff at the shop come over and do it. He paid them anyway. But my dad was also a huge fan of sports. He took me to see the Mud Hens play baseball and the University of Toledo men's basketball. Chuck Chukovitz was my first real hero.
Donoher's favorite job, though, during his UD summers was at Inverness.
That golf course is world famous on the PGA Tour. I did not caddy so much. I was primarily working for the greenskeeper. Mow the greens, tend the course. I loved that job and that course.
He married Sonia in 1954, and I asked him where they met.
I knew her from campus, but really we started talking at a football game. UD was playing at the University of Cincinnati at Nippert Stadium. We went there separately to see the game.
That's a historic football stadium. Nippert is right in the heart of the University of Cincinnati campus. Many great moments, but a 66-year marriage also started there. He married her in 1954 in Toledo at the St. Agnes Church, where his boyhood basketball court still stood. His dad influenced him into sales, but Donoher was not a salesman. Where basketball went, so did he, chasing the game relentlessly. He assisted at Dayton Chaminade Julienne High School, and Coach Blackburn hired him as an assistant, but first to scout. I know this, he developed a unique scouting system over his decades of experience. I watched him scout for Fenwick High School on Pat Krecky's staff boys basketball. I went with him a couple of times around 2009. Coaches, you will appreciate it. This segment is for you coaches. He would go to a game, sit in the stands, and he rarely took his eyes off the court, but he could write at the same time on his paper. He had a shorthand method. The team he was scouting would run something, he would write LaSalle offense. That would tell him everything he needed, and he never lowered his head to watch his writing. I couldn't do that. I still can't. I have to look at my paper when I'm writing, then look back up and miss what I miss. Among the reasons I prefer video scouting is I can rewind that, stop the video, diagram, go back. I never miss anything on video. He didn't need to do that. He would pick off an inbounds play live, refer to it as NC, North Carolina, and he had a whole baseline out of bounds play in 2 words, no diagram, never averting his eyes from the court. Now, he had scouted for general manager Jim Paxson and the Cleveland Cavaliers for 7 seasons, plus his own scouting for UD in the 1960s, the 70s, and the 80s. So, of course, by the time I'm with him about 2009, he has mega experience way beyond the high school game. I think I was watching a PhD in a high school world. When he diagrammed for others, usually it was not on paper, but I would ask him to show me at times, and this is his diagram sketching. But what he loved and adored, and he always used by the 21st century, was his magnet board. Here's a board. He would show an offense, moving those magnets quickly, how the red, that was always his offense, and how it ran versus the yellow defenders. In October 2007, Rick Majerus invited Coach Donoher to his practice. Majerus had taken over at St. Louis University and was putting in his system for his Billikens. Donoher invited me to go. I was so thrilled to go with him. As we got in his car in his driveway, Sonia told me to get in the front seat. I said, no, Sonia, it's okay. I'll sit in the back seat. And she says,
no, he's going to need you.
Thinking I would be of some help navigating in the front passenger seat.
And I want to read.
She laid on the back seat and read her Mariah Stewart suspense novel. Donoher warned me that Majerus practices were unlike anything I'd ever seen. I had watched a lot of practices, Huggins at the University of Cincinnati during my time in the media in Cincinnati, and many others. But we arrived on the St. Louis campus, and Majerus was astounding in his detail. I felt like I had known something about coaching walking in. I felt so unprepared after witnessing the Majerus specifics. I told Coach Donoher, this is bad for my confidence. I don't know anything compared to this. Donoher said,
I was with Ray Meyer, Hall of Fame DePaul coach, at a practice. It was a walkthrough in a hotel ballroom, a Marriott. And Majerus taped the floor with different colors, hung large diagrams on the wall that had been rolled up in those foot-long tubes that architects or designers use to protect their sketches. His assistants pulled 15 or so from the tubes and taped each one up on the wall. His walkthrough was a few hours, most are 45 minutes, especially with no hoops to shoot on. Somewhere in hour 2, Coach Meyer leans over and whispers to me, "I've been stealing money all these years."
A Majerus practice was like a master class in details. That weekend, Friday, was a light 2 hours. Saturday, a 4-hour practice. Sunday, he cut back to 3 hours. Practice was closed, so the three of us were the only people sitting on the concrete slabs known as the seats at this ancient but rustic Bauman Eberhard Center. They call it the West Pine Gym on the St. Louis campus. Then he sat on a bar stool at half court, and he coached, both ends. We were high in the stands, and I could hear every word in that old field house. He was meticulous, more like a surgeon than a coach. Every single step, really even a lean on the wrong foot, was the difference between a make and a miss, a defensive hold or giving up a hoop. That night, we went to dinner with him. What was a little surprising is Majerus did not really want to talk basketball at dinner. He was a man of arts, the theater, movies, music. I asked him one question about basketball. He shut it down. No basketball here. Although he might have asked Mick, as he called Donoher, "Mick, you think my guys are getting into help? Think they're getting there consistently? What do you see? I know I'm missing things. What do we need to do, Mick?" Majerus considered Donoher an elite, a mentor who had been through all the wars. On the Sunday of the final practice, he looked into the stands and he yelled, or actually he was loud enough anyway. He says, "Mick, come on down here, please." I heard Donoher whisper to Sonia,
"Oh, no."
Donoher's not exactly an extrovert. He went to the floor, and then I watched as Majerus told his team of 2007 who this was in their presence. I can't remember all the plaudits. There were so many. And Majerus had a rich vocabulary. But I do remember him telling the players to get in a single file line. "Mick, you stand right here, and all of you shake this man's hand and introduce yourself to one of the greatest coaches of all time." It is a highlight of my life to have been in an old school 1930s arena, watching as players, assistant coaches, and grad assistants all moved through that line paying homage to Donoher. That Sunday afternoon, we left for Dayton. Once again, Sonia politely said,
You sit up front. I've got my book, and he's going to need you.
She reclined in the back seat to read her best-selling Stewart mystery series. And again, I thought, okay, I can put the directions on my GPS here on my phone, but I knew Donoher needed no directions. He put his ever-present briefcase between us, under the radio on the floor, as he started the car, and we headed for home. GPS, 5 hours, 32 minutes. We're on I-70 East, and he reaches into his briefcase, eyes on the road, but he pulls his magnet board out of his briefcase, plops it on the portion of the seat between us, and he starts magnetizing the Majerus offense. He cannot keep this in his head. He has to show someone what he saw. He starts moving those magnets on the board.
See, Rick wants them to hit here near that red tape he had on the floor. Then be sure to be spaced here behind his blue tape line.
He's driving 75 miles per hour, passing trucks, slower cars, while he's moving these pieces on the board with the efficiency of a professional card dealer. His eyes are mostly on the road, but every now and then he looks down.
And he wants his defense over here if the ball is on that side of the floor.
I'm nodding and glancing anxiously at the speedometer, which is reaching 78 miles per hour, but he's not missing a beat. Eyes up on the road, left hand on the wheel, right hand on the magnets of the board. I'm glancing back at Sonia, hoping to catch her eye so she'll tell him not to multitask, but she won't look at me. She's not looking up from the book. She knows that's why I'm in the front seat. She stares at her book. I think she's reading. Yeah, Sonia knew how to scout situations too. She knew her husband would not be able to keep all that in his head without getting out that precious magnet board. He drove that way for most of the trip. Expressway, trucks, slow drivers, it was not going to stop his basketball thoughts from pouring out at lightning speed on his board. Sonia was still reading. The board was still out on the seat when he pulled into his Dayton driveway. 4 hours, 58 minutes later. Something else about this trip. He said it was John McVay who gave us Mickey baskets. Donoher was named head coach 1964-65 season after Coach Blackburn's untimely death from cancer. John McVay became the UD head football coach about the same time for the 1965 season, and they became lifelong friends. It was McVay who expanded the Mick moniker.
He said I coached the baskets, so that's what he called me. Mickey Baskets.
McVay spent 8 years with UD football, finished with a losing career record of 37-41. An alum who was disgruntled with McVay told Donoher, "Can't McVay see he's through in football?" Donoher laughed at the memory of the comment years later.
John went on to the NFL, won 5 Super Bowls with the 49ers. He's in the 49ers Hall of Fame, and the franchise draft room is named after him. He might have been through with Dayton football, but he wasn't finished.
His Coach Blackburn stories are myriad. Here's 2. First, remember he played under Blackburn from 1950 through 1954.
Blackburn was a chain smoker. After practice, he would hustle to his office to light up, at halftime and postgame. A smoke ASAP. He was a stern coach who believed in man-to-man defense, and he meant man-to-man. If he saw today's game like the help side Majerus wanted, Blackburn would growl and say, "That's just a puny zone." People helping into zones of the court like past Majerus green line is called zone defense. When we played for him, I had mine, you had yours. Keep him from scoring, box your man out, go get the rebound. And if you got beat in any of those areas, you went to the bench. One game I got beat for a layup. Then the ball was inbounded back to me, and somehow I lost it out of bounds. I saw the replacement at the table checking in. I walked toward the furthest chair on the bench, but before I got there, he wagged his finger at me to sit in that chair next to him. I sat, there was silence. Then he turned and said, "All the players in all the land, and I get you." And he waved me away. I couldn't get to that chair at the end of the bench quick enough.
Next story, he's an assistant coach. Donoher saw the internal emotional strains of the game's DNA, its heritage from the incorrigibles.
A player meets with Blackburn to talk about his lack of playing time. I'm sitting in on it. I had not dealt with this much as an assistant, so I thought it would be a long exchange. The player starts in why he should play more. Blackburn cuts in and says, "I have a big advantage over you. I get to watch your sorry butt practice every day. I get to see all the mistakes you make and all the box outs you miss and the terrible effort you call defense, so you don't get to see what I see." He paused there, took a deep drag of his unfiltered cigarette, blows the smoke across his desk directly at the player. "That's all. Now get out of my office." And that was the end of it.
Donoher often visited Adolph Rupp, especially in the summers, with such an easy drive from Dayton to Lexington, Kentucky. The only story I can remember is Donoher visiting Rupp on the UK campus for a summer league event. So Rupp is watching his Kentucky team play, but Rupp is up in the stands with Donoher during the summer game when the referee makes a call that Rupp did not like.
This young ref runs over to the stands and goes into a long explanation of why his call was right. And Coach Rupp is getting madder by the second. He says, "Oh, you know so much about the game that you can tell me why that call was right? I guess I haven't been around much. I bet you would tell a doctor to get the patient's heartbeat by putting the stethoscope up the patient's arse."
When Donoher was assisting Bob Knight during the 1984 Olympic Games, the team was loaded. While holding a substantial lead in an early round game, Knight was getting all the players into the game, while Jordan, Ewing, and Mullen were all on the bench. The opposing team made one of those big runs where it cuts deeply into the lead. Donoher was on the bench, sitting next to another distinguished assistant coach as they watched that lead dwindle.
Legendary coach Hank Iba asked me why Knight was subbing so literally, and I said, "Well, Mr. Iba, I think he wants to get everyone in the game so they feel a part of it. If it gets much closer, I'm sure Coach Knight will get Jordan back in the game." Coach Iba never took his eyes off the floor and said, "Well, speaking for me, I never did like to win the same game twice."
I knew who Coach Donoher was when I moved to Cincinnati in 1980. I interviewed him during that decade several times as a member of the Cincinnati media. But I was just one of a crowd holding a mic in front of his face. He did not know me. And Cincinnati and Dayton, those are separate media markets. We covered the University of Cincinnati and Xavier 95% of the time. But if Dayton went far enough in the tournament, which happened often during Donoher's tenure, then we would crew up there, go to UD Arena for sound bites. I never even saw him practice at UD. I just held a mic while he did a press conference. In 2005, I was waiting for my practice to begin at Fenwick High School. I was the girls' varsity basketball head coach. I'm sitting on the sideline in a chair. The boys are wrapping their practice. We got next on the court. My head is down, studying the agenda on my lap, focused on that upcoming practice. You know how we coaches want to get everything in, and we think if we look long and hard enough at that list, maybe this will be the day that we get it all in, which never happens for me. All of a sudden, I hear,
"Hi."
And a hand sticks into my eyesight area over the top of my practice plan. I shake the hand, but I don't look up because it's a small community. We know each other in that gym. As I shake the hand, I hear,
"I'm Don Donoher. I'm going to be assistant here. Nice to meet you."
I say, uh-huh. Then I realize what I heard. Wait, what? Who? No way I just did that. I look up. He's on to the next person introducing himself, so I catch up and I say, "Wow, Coach, sorry. I introduced myself. Tell him I didn't expect an icon in our gym." He was, of course, very gracious. Here's the part I want you to hear. I watched him walk the gym and introduce himself to everyone, full name, like he had just moved in from a remote high school in Alaska. He had exited college coaching, but he wasn't ready to stop teaching the game. So he assisted head coach Pat Krecky with the boys Fenwick program for 13 years. He was a chief scout. He was in charge of the scout team during practice, showing the scout team how to run the opposition stuff, the sets, the inbounds, defenses, against the starters who would then know what to expect in the upcoming game. I once had the audacity, and this is a bit embarrassing, to ask him to scout my girls' varsity team. I think now, and I cringe that I'm asking a college coach who won 63% of his NCAA Division I games and played in the championship game, and I'm asking him to come to my game in the middle of the evening, probably in the middle of nowhere, and I ask him, "Will you scout my team? Tell me what I can do better as a coach." So he came to the game, this is about 2006, and afterward he said,
"That guard of yours has court awareness. She pass fakes, feeds no-look passes better than most of my Dayton players ever did. Love that red call."
Red was a defensive call. It meant trapping an on-ball pick. Very common boilerplate maneuver in the game.
"Smart call."
He said that as though he had never seen it before, although I knew. He had seen it thousands of times, and he had used it as a head coach. He could make you feel like you knew what you were doing. Maybe because to Donoher,
a team is a team. Doesn't matter much where it is or what level.
And he also felt,
there are as many ways to play the game as there are coaches to teach it. A coach just has to believe in their system and what they are teaching.
A fellow colleague coach of mine during that era, Ron Rousseau, was an outstanding head coach at Miamisburg. He had the girls there. We scrimmaged every year. I introduced him to Donoher when he came to our gym. And I say to Donoher, "This is Ron." And Donoher says,
"Oh, hi, Ron. How have you been? Good to see you again."
I'm a lifelong Flyer fan. I had worked his basketball camps at UD years earlier. I was one of a large, really huge staff, and that he remembered me was such a thrill. The day he exited was the darkest day in UD history.
In 2015, Coach Donoher was elected to the National Collegiate Basketball Hall of Fame. Dayton business guru Clay Mathill generously provided a private jet to fly him there the day of the induction. So Donoher flew into Kansas City late afternoon Friday, attended the ceremony that night, and took the private Mathill charter jet home. Same night, arriving back in Dayton somewhere around midnight, maybe a little later. The next morning, he's in the Fenwick High School parking lot boarding a yellow school bus. As head coach Krecky remembers it,
our regular freshman coach had to miss for a family reason. I had a conflict as I was going to our varsity scrimmage at a different high school. The first one to volunteer to run the freshman was Coach. I said, "Wait, don't you have a rather special weekend coming up, Hall of Fame and all?" He says, "Nope, I'll be back." So Saturday morning about 8 a.m. There he goes from the school parking lot, flying off on the yellow bus to coach some freshman scrimmage.
This goes back to his philosophy that a team is a team no matter what the level is. He wanted to coach and he wanted to teach the game. I wasn't there, but I would wager he had his magnet board with him that day.
I still have 2 magnet boards. I keep them at home on my desk, but I haven't used them lately. I don't have a team right now.
When he did have a team, for instance as UD head coach, he nearly always worked the game from his chair, seated. He said coaches of his era did not roam the sideline. No coach's box necessary.
We sat, watched, and coached from the seat. All that pacing around started with AAU summer leagues. Coat, tie, and sit was how we did it.
Asked by the Toledo Blade newspaper in 1985 why he kept such a low profile as a coach.
I feel players are for the participants. Coaches are just a necessary evil.
Naismith is quoted in 1906 as saying,
"You can't coach basketball, you just play it."
Naismith did coach for 9 years, being the only coach in the University of Kansas history with a losing record of 55 wins and 60 losses. This occasion in 2014 was recorded by Tim Freeze, hosted by Rex Gardecki. Over 60 of Coach Donoher's former players were present for an on-campus celebration in his honor. His speech on this night included a portion on the relay. Afterwards, several players ad-libbed stories from their tables, which are a mix of banquet satire and humor, the athlete's code or disguise of expressing love and appreciation for their days with Donoher.
I knew he cared very much for me as a human being, but I also noticed that he cared more for me as a human being when I played better. Mike Sylvester, class of '74. I came to Dayton shortly after my dad passed away, and at that time Blackburn was the coach and as rough and gruff as could be. And when Blackburn was sick, Donoher helped me. I look at him as a gentleman as well as a great coach. Henry Finkel, class of '66. I walked in here as a 17-year-old kid and walked out as a man. Not only because of what I got from a coaching standpoint but also from the education I got at Dayton, the experience, the people I had a chance to be associated with, the values that coach put into me. It has carried with me for the rest of my life to where I am now. Anthony Grant, class of '87. He's more than a coach, he's a friend. Experiences I had with him, you can't put a value on it. His standards were so high for us all. By the time I got to Portland, I thought these practices here in the NBA are so easy. Johnny Davis, class of '76. We had lost the game and he's yelling at us about not being tough enough, Donoher says. If we ever get into a real fight, we would have the greatest track team in the country. Ed Young, class of '87. Coach looked distressed. I asked him, "Why are you so worried?" He said one of our players had a whiff. I said, "What's a whiff?" He says, "Withdrawal, incomplete and 2 Fs. Jim Paxson, class of '79. He never took any of my BS. He made me a UD graduate. And he made me a man. So thank you, Coach." Dennis Papp, class of '67. He always had that freaking briefcase with him. He opened it and we thought, here come all the answers. And he pulls something out and all he had in it was a shirt Sonia had pressed for him. Rex Gardecki, class of '72. He said you have to be prepared in 3 areas. Mentally, physically and spiritually. I never forgot that. Apart from my mother and father, he is the most influential person in my life. Bobby Joe Hooper, class of '68. We lost at Eastern Kentucky and got on the bus to come home. Coach says, "I want all of you to sit next to each other. 2 in a seat. I don't want to see anybody sitting in a seat alone. I want the stink to rub off on each other. And when we get to the Howard Johnsons to eat, I don't want to hear anything except the forks hitting the plates." George Janke, class of '70. My mom couldn't be here tonight and she just wanted me to say thanks to all of you for the great impact you made on her life, on our family life. I could not have had a better childhood. I was the luckiest kid around and it goes back to all of you guys, his players. It wouldn't have been possible without your contributions. Brian Donoher, class of '91. He was my head coach for 4 years in college. Then he worked for me for 7 years as a scout when I was general manager with the Cavaliers. Working together with him was one of the great times of my life. Jim Paxson, class of '79. While he was recruiting me from Belmont High School, he was only 14 years older than me, so more like a big brother than a father figure. He was very friendly to me, which I was hoping for because I had been dreaming all my life of being a Flyer. So I get there and it's our first practice. The freshmen charge out there for a layup line. The varsity is on the big court and we freshmen are on the side court. Now it's a tight fit right there and I remember being out, maybe my shoe, just slightly out on the main court and all of a sudden I start hearing this yelling, screaming. I look and Mick's down at the end of the court sitting on the railing with the varsity and his face is so red. And he's screaming looking down at us freshmen. And I'm like, what's the matter? Hey Hooper, what's he yelling at? And Hooper says to me, he's yelling at you because you're on the varsity court. I mean I have half my shoe on the court, and I'm like, Mick, it's me, your pal Don May. What happened? But he was doing the role as a coach and we all related to that. We knew what that was all about. We knew behind that was a man who was always on our side. And wanted the best for us, wanted us to give the best like he always did. Don May, class of '67.
It was Sonia who was Donoher's lifeline of support. Tragically, in early 2020, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and she died later that year in November. He would visit Sonia at the Calvary Cemetery in Dayton. I rode with him there in 2021 when he allowed me to visit her with him. I watched as he pulled the car up close to the gravesite, parked on that paved secondary road. He pulled a portable lawn chair out of the trunk, and then he would sit there for hours reading a book. The book I saw him reading, 7-Story Mountain by Tom Merton. When he married Sonia, his brother, Father Ned, was the priest celebrant. And also about his family. His 3 brothers were all priests. He was the only layman among the Donoher sons. His older sister, she was a successful mom with a big family of her own. The Donoher family was very supportive of his coaching. This is different than Naismith, whose older sister Annie was incensed at him for the rest of his life for veering from theology and a life in the ministry. Said Naismith,
on a visit to my only sister, I asked her if she had ever forgiven me for leaving the ministry. She looked seriously at me, shook her head and said, no. You put your hand to the plow and turned back.
I had to look it up, King James, Luke 9, verse 62. And Jesus said unto him, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. Naismith was sad in writing,
as long as she lived, she never witnessed a basketball game. And I believe that she was a little ashamed to think that I had been the originator of the game.
Annie was 3 years older, and she never recognized the number of jobs that Naismith created for players and coaches and teachers. Consider the lives and souls he might have saved through his worldwide game, which seems at least equal to that of what he could have done from a single pulpit in a single community. Donoher's family was and is solid in his support, which allowed him to create his UD family. And he remains busy even as we record this now. He's aged 91.
Good days are like today. A former player and assistant coach visited. We went out and spent the day together.
He also has a special room in his apartment. He's turned it into his research library.
I go there and do mental exercises. I will take an atlas of the USA, look at the big cities, and I remember the days that I spent in that city and what I did.
This picture is a coaches gathering in 2014 at Roosters in Springboro, Ohio. Donoher is sitting with Wilmington College women's coach Jerry Sheevy, 2 of Ohio's all-time great coaches. I worked for Coach Sheevy for 1 year. I learned so much from him. He won the NCAA Division III national title at Wilmington College in 2004. Both are in the state of Ohio Basketball Hall of Fame. Sheevy and his Wilmington national champions were inducted into the State Hall of Fame that year, 2014. And Donoher was already in, but he spoke on behalf of Finkel, who was inducted but could not attend. Here's the Finkel backstory. As a freshman, he had attended a New Jersey college, but when his father died, he left college to work at a shipyard. Therefore, he was actually eligible for the NBA draft after his sophomore season with the Flyers. He was drafted in 1965 and 1966. Both times he chose UD over going to the NBA. It was Donoher's theme of the induction speech.
This college era is about one and done, but Henry Finkel had his chance and stayed at Dayton. He was drafted by the Lakers, who made a serious offer, big money. But he stayed at Dayton, and later as a Celtic, his teammate Don Nelson told him how dumb it was to play for free for 2 more years and lose that salary, plus 2 years on a retirement pension. Finkel said, "The Dayton years were the best years of my life, and when I graduated, that meant the world to my mom." So here was Henry playing for his mom, and who am I to disagree with a mom wishing the best for her son? Henry Finkel's college career was 4 and more. And it's a good thing, because had he gone to the NBA for that 65 season, the truth is, without Henry, I'm one and done. But with Henry, we go to the Sweet 16, then to the 67 NCAA Finals. That loss to UCLA hurt, but our athletic director said afterward in the locker room, "It hurts now, but you just built us a new arena." And 2 years later, in 1969, we had UD Arena.
Finkel wasn't on the team in 1967. He was an NBA rookie with the Lakers. But Donoher felt Finkel's presence the previous years impacted the program so profoundly that Finkel was a relay catalyst. Even after his departure, when he seemed virtually forced to go to the NBA, Finkel had helped indelibly shape the 67 team's mindset, which believed it would ascend to the game that built UD Arena. This is my favorite picture of him. Donoher at the Donoher Basketball Center, circa 2016, on the campus of the University of Dayton. True, he has the center where the most famous tournament in basketball history opens, March Madness. He is in the prestigious College Basketball Hall of Fame, as we discussed, and I know he is now under nomination for the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, and it's my belief, as is apparent in this podcast tribute, he belongs in basketball's ultimate shrine. He took the baton in the relay of basketball history and has stretched it through 3/4 of the 20th and the opening quarter of the 21st century. As an assistant, a gold medal for the 1984 Olympic team. As head coach, he has 437 wins, 1 NCAA championship game and Final Four, twice to the Elite Eight, 5 Sweet 16s, and he has an NIT championship in 1968 when it was still a prominent tournament. Remember, there were only 23 teams taken into the 1968 NCAA tournament, not the 68 of today as of this recording. The next 16 that year went to the NIT. Only 39 teams in the postseason then, not 68. UD graduate class of 1977 and Dayton native Tim Stonecash said,
Donoher was the first coach to take his team to the NCAA championship game 1 year, then to the NIT championship game the very next year.
UD defeated the University of Kansas in 1968, the college where the game's inventor coached and taught, and where Naismith's original 13 rules are now enshrined. Those are his basketball credentials. How about his civic and spiritual duty? Staying at one university to play, graduate, scout, assist, and head coach. A life dedicated to the city where his university resides. Once he moved in from Toledo, he never left Dayton. Donoher was 6 years old when Naismith passed in 1939. His epitaph on page 191 of his book reads, "Dr. Naismith used what God gave him and made his life count," as has Donoher. In anyone's vision of the historic basketball relay, Naismith, as creator, will always be the opening leg, and Donoher will have taken an exchange of the theoretical baton for a successful run. He summarized it in closing his speech.
The bottom line of the relay is UD basketball excelled.